What's up everyone, Crito here, and I've been talking about Monsters and Memories quite a bit lately on my stream, and I've been getting a lot of questions like, can I play, how do I play, where do I get the client, and those are usually followed up with character creation questions, so we're going to go over all of those right now. First question, can you play? And the answer is yes, you can during the open testing phases that they're doing. The next open test phase is going to be September 1st, and it's going to run for about a week, which is going to give you a lot of time to be able to get into the game and see if it's the game for you. If you want to be part of that phase, you're going to go here to monstersandmemories.com. There's a play button right here at the top. You're going to hit play, and you're going to register for an account here. Once you have registered, click on login, put in your information, and hit submit. On this page, you're going to click here to download, so we're going to click on that. And I do recommend anyone that is new to the game to go right here and click on Game Manual and read that game manual. It is very, very helpful as there are no tutorials in the game. Once you have downloaded that zip file, you're going to click on that to open it up. If it doesn't pop up here in the top right, you go to your download folder and look for M&M Launcher zip file. You're going to highlight all of these and copy those, and we're going to put those into a folder on our hard drive here, Monsters and Memories, and just drop everything or paste everything into there. And then from here, we're going to run the launcher. Double click on that. If this Windows Defender pops up, click on More Info and then click Run Anyway. And then it's going to pop up the launcher. You're going to put in your information that you just created a moment ago, and then you're going to hit Log In. Once you do that, this will pop up right here. And if it's the first time you log in, it'll have a little button right down here that says update or download or something along those lines. If you have already downloaded the game, it will always verify the files every time that you launch it to make sure all the files are there. And then if you have any issues running the game and when you click the play button, that'll appear here. There is also going to be a repair button, which will pop up here in just a second. You may need to click on that. So that's pretty much everything you need to know about getting into the game. So now let's take a look at character creation. Okay, so we hit play, we chose our server, and we are now creating our first character, and I get a lot of questions about character creation because people are already trying to min-max their characters or make sure they don't brick their characters or things of that nature. So we're going to go through each and every part of this to hopefully ease some of that process for you. We're going to start over here with the class race combo, and then we'll move over here to statistics and go through all of that. So first and foremost, we're going to look at race. Race only determines two things for the most part. We're going to go over some minute things that it does do, but it's not going to be a big deal. So it's really only going to determine two things. One is what your character looks like, and two, what class your character can be. So don't worry about, is this the right race for the right class, or is this the right class for the right race, etc. None of that is going to matter. So just decide what your character race wants to be, and then choose a class based on that, or choose what class you want to be and find the race that you like for that class. Note that the human can be any class, but every other race has a limited selection. Now that we have chosen our race class combo, we can go over here to appearance, and under appearance you can choose male, female, and randomize here if you want to make your character look a little bit different than everybody else. There's not a lot of options here, but there's enough to make your character look a bit different. So kind of go through this, choose what you want to do, and hopefully we see some more options later on down the road. The next thing we're going to talk about is statistics or stats. This is another big question that a lot of people have. They want to make sure that they put the right stats for the right class and the right race and all that kind of stuff. So the first thing I want to point out again is your race does not matter. The only thing that determines your starting stats is going to be your class. So if we look here, I'm on a dwarf bard, and these are my starting stats. If I were to change to a halfling and I still have a bard, same exact starting stats. So your race does not matter for your stats. The only thing is going to be what class you are. Your class will change your starting stats slightly. What it's going to do is it's going to highlight the stat that you most likely will need for that class. So bard, for example, is going to be using dexterity and charisma. Cleric is going to be using wisdom with a little bit in charisma. Elementalist is going to be mostly using intelligence, and so on. So it's going to tell you what your main stat is when you choose your class, by which one of these is going to be higher. You have 7 points that you can allocate. There is a maximum of 20 that you can get on any given stat. I recommend maxing out the 1 or 2 stats that they already have higher, so you can max those out, which will give you enough points to probably max out a third stat, and then you can choose whatever you want it to be. So you should be able to start with 3 stats at 20 no matter what class you choose. So that should go over everything on starting stats. Let's go over what each of these stats mean. Okay, so before we get into what each one of the stats does, I do want to say some of this is going to be fact, some is going to be speculation, and I will try to let you know which is which as we go through each one of the stats. So let's talk about strength. Strength is going to determine 2 things. The first is going to be the amount of physical damage you do with weapons. This is going to include swords and hammers, and I believe it also is going to determine how much damage you do with thrown weapons, bow and arrow, and even small weapons like a dagger for a rogue. Some people do speculate that dexterity might determine how much damage you do with small weapons or thrown or ranged weapons, but I believe it is all going to be strength. If you know for a fact, please let us know down in the comments below. I would love to see that information so that we can test it further. But for now, we're going to say that strength determines all physical damage until we know otherwise. The second thing that strength is going to determine is your carry capacity. Once you are over carry capacity, you become encumbered. If you are encumbered, you move slower. You also cannot cast travel type spells like Gate if you are encumbered. So spellcasters will also need to have enough strength to be able to carry around the items that they have. Stamina is pretty simple. It directly determines how much health you have, and the amount of health that you get per point of stamina is determined by 2 factors. The first is going to be your class, and the second is going to be your level. So tanks, for example, which are going to be your fighter, your inquisitor, paladin, and shadow knight, are going to get more health per point of stamina than all of the other classes. The next most are going to be your archer, bard, beastmaster, monk, ranger, rogue, and I believe the spellblade falls in with those. Third most is going to be the cleric, druid, and shaman, which are your priests. And lastly, your elementalist, enchanter, and wizard are going to get the least amount of health per point of stamina. Next factor is going to be your level. So as you get higher level, you might gain more per stamina based on your class. So a fighter at level 10 might be getting 3 or 4 points of health per point of stamina, but when they hit level 20, they might be getting 4 to 5 or 6 points of health per point of stamina. Moving on to dexterity. We kind of already talked about dexterity a little bit. It might be a determining factor for your ranged weapons and your small weapons like daggers and short swords. I don't believe that's going to be the case, but what I do know that it'll be for is your accuracy or your hit chance. So your dexterity, the higher your dexterity, the higher chance you have to actually hit an enemy with the weapon, and the lower chance that they have to avoid it. Next up, we have agility, and this is mostly a defensive stat. So the higher your agility, the higher chance you have to avoid damage. This is going to factor into things like your dodge chance, your block chance, and your parry chance. So your higher agility is going to help increase the chance that those things will trigger. So pretty much all tanks will want to have high agility. Agility might also determine in for things when you're sneaking. So if you're playing a rogue and you're trying to sneak around, agility may be a factor there, but I'm not 100% sure on that one. Now we have intelligence and wisdom, and I'm putting these two together because they seem to do the exact same thing, and that is going to be determining your mana pool. So it doesn't matter what class you have, whichever of these two is higher is going to give you how much mana you have. So if you have 20 intelligence, make any class that you want, you're going to have 65 mana. If you have 20 wisdom, make any class that you want, as long as it has a mana pool, it's going to have 65 mana, and you could put 20 into both of these two stats and make a class, and it will have 65 mana. So it doesn't seem to matter which one that you choose. Your mana pool is going to come from one of those two, whichever is going to be higher. That said, I would recommend putting points into the one that the game tells you is higher. So like if we choose a cleric here, cleric is saying that wisdom is at 19, but intelligence is at 17. I would probably just go ahead and max out wisdom. Elementalist, for example, or enchanter are going to have slightly higher intelligence rather than wisdom, so you're going to want to put points into intelligence, and you can ignore the other one. The reason I say to go ahead and do this, one is it saves you your remaining points that you have up here to allocate into other things, and 2, because the gear in the game is most likely going to be determining what stats are on it. So if you get some robes are generally going to be for elementalist, enchanter, wizards, those types of classes, and they're probably going to have intelligence on them, whereas items that are made for the priest classes like your cleric, your druid, and your shaman are most likely going to have wisdom on them. So you're going to want to go ahead and just make sure that you separate those now, even though they do basically the exact same thing. And finally, we have charisma. Charisma is going to do 2 different things. The first is going to be your barter prices. It's going to increase or decrease your sell price based on the amount of charisma that you have. And secondly, your mental abilities. So things like mesmerize on the enchanter, it's going to help those be resisted less. And then charms, it's going to help those break less often. So if you're playing an enchanter, you definitely want to have charisma. Classes like the Bard or maybe even the Druid, when they're charming a pet, may want to have more charisma so that they can charm their pet for a little bit longer. And that brings us to our traits, and I believe that the major combat trait is probably the most important decision you're going to have to make outside of the class itself, as it's going to have the biggest impact on your character late game, down the road when you're higher level and you have better gear. The reason for that is because it's a percentage increase to one of your stats or to your resistances. There's also these abilities called hardiness for your stun resistance of 15%, and slippery, which is going to increase your root resistance by 15%. And then the last thing that I want to point out, where I said previously there's only 2 things that race is going to determine. There was one more thing, and I said I would point it out later, and that's this right here. It gives you an ability for stone form if you are a dwarf or a deep dwarf, which isn't in the game yet, but it gives you this additional ability. So these things are definitely going to make a very big difference down the road, and you're going to want to make sure you choose one that's right for you. For example, if you're playing a wizard, you're probably not going to want to get brawn, which is going to increase your strength by 5%, and the active ability is going to increase your strength by 50% for 15 seconds. Most likely, you're going to want to go with something like intelligence to increase your intelligence, which will increase your mana pool by a certain amount for that time. Another thing that would be really good for wizards would be maybe a different resistances, or the ability to actually resist stun effects or be immune to stun effects is probably another really, really big one. So make sure you're looking through all of these and pick something that is very good for your class specifically. Moving on to minor combat traits, I wouldn't worry about this one at all. You can pretty much choose whichever one you want, and it will not matter by the end game in the least, because all it really does is it gives you a little bit of a boost in the beginning. So when you're level 1, it'll help you very, very slightly on those first few mobs that you're killing to be able to take them out a little bit easier. But what you really want to look at here is how it increases the skill 25% faster. So what I would recommend for these is choosing a skill that you probably will not use a lot, but you still want to max out. For example, if you're playing a cleric, you look at something like alteration. Alteration spells heal and enhance allies and hinder enemies. You're going to be healing and enhancing allies a lot, so you're probably going to have alteration skill maxed out very quickly. Every single time that you level, you're going to get it up very, very fast, and it's going to be capped out, which means that none of this is going to be relevant. But something like conjuration, you're not going to be doing a lot of conjuring of items or creatures as a cleric, so conjuration spells summon creatures and objects and deal damage over time to enemies. Clerics don't really have any damage over time abilities. They don't really summon creatures. They do have an ability to allow them to summon food and water, but they're not going to be casting it a whole lot. So you might want to put this into conjuration so that it just increases that skill faster. Like I said, by the end of the game, you're going to have all of these maxed out that are relevant to your class anyway, so it really won't matter. Major non-combat traits. These are not a big deal, so it doesn't matter which one you choose in the beginning. It's not going to make or break your character. However, depending on your playstyle, they could be beneficial. So we're going to go over them very quickly. Master Artisan, if you are planning to do any type of trade skill, Master Artisan could be for you. You can actually have all the different trade skills on one character if you want to in this game. And if you do that, Master Artisan is very beneficial to you, as it will save you a ton of money while you're trying to level those up in the long run. Now, just like in the minor combat traits, once you have maxed out all of your trade skills, this becomes a worthless trait. So make sure that you're only choosing this if you're planning on doing a lot of trade skills. Next up, we have fast metabolism. Currently, endurance doesn't do anything in this game that I know of other than allow you to jump, and you have 100 endurance, and it costs 10 endurance every time you jump, so you can jump 10 times before you need to rest again. So this is only going to allow you to jump 2 more times before you need to rest, but at the same time, it's going to make you consume food 25% faster, so I would not recommend this at this time. Later on down the road, endurance might be beneficial, in which case this might be really nice to have. Next up, we have Forage. Forage is a good skill in my opinion, as it levels up. So as you get higher level, you can actually level this skill up, and you can start gathering food, drink, and other supplies. So far, the other supplies are things like different types of herbs, and then worms if you're going to be doing some sort of fishing. So it can be beneficial to get some food and drink for free, especially if you're going to be out on a long XP grind and you don't want to summon food and water with a character. Like if you're playing a cleric or a druid or a summoner, you can summon food and water, so that's not going to be a big deal. But anyway, that's what Forage does. It can be beneficial. Infravision is something that, in my opinion, is completely worthless. It would be a fantastic skill if you couldn't just turn up the gamma or turn up the brightness on your monitor or whatever. That kind of negates the purpose of infravision. So I'd recommend not getting this and then just turning up the gamma on your screen, and it basically does the same thing. Now, if you want to have the full, complete experience of the game and you don't want to mess with the brightness and gamma on your monitor, then infravision might be for you, but I personally feel like it's just a wasted thing. Iron Lung. So your underwater air capacity is increased by 200%, but your endurance is decreased by 25%. As we already talked about, the endurance is kind of pointless. So this is basically going to increase your air capacity by 200%. Again, not a big deal. Later in the game, you're going to have a spell called Enduring Breath, and you're going to be able to breathe underwater anyway. So it's not going to really make a big deal. Plus, there's not a whole lot of places in this game where you're going to be doing a lot of swimming. At least early on, up to about level 20 or so, you're not going to be doing any swimming, so I really wouldn't worry about it too much. Slow metabolism. This, again, is another one of those ones that's going to decrease your endurance. So take that as you will, based on our conversation previous about endurance, but you consume 25% slower. This can be very beneficial, again, if you don't have a way to get food and water, if you don't have like a cleric or a druid to summon food and water, or if you don't have Forage. I personally would just take Forage or just buy more food, and then you don't have to worry about decreasing your endurance. Next up, we have the Sneak ability. This is another one of those where it's only based on your race. So Halflings can get Sneak on any race that or any class that they are, but do note that if you choose Rogue or Bard, Sneak is no longer available because they're already going to be getting Sneak as part of their class. But if you choose any other ability or any other class, Sneak is an option. I don't know if this is going to allow you to level it up though, so it may not be good later on down the road when you only have 1 point in Sneak, but if it allows you to level it up, it could be really nice to be a fighter that's able to sneak around behind mobs. Ultravision, not in the game yet, and probably going to be something for like the Deep Dwarves, maybe the Trolls or something, but it's going to basically be a different form of vision similar to infravision. So over all of these, I would take either Master Artisan or Forage if it were me. And finally, for our last trait, we have the minor non-combat trait. Again, these are not going to make a big difference in your character's power at all, but it's going to help you level up some of your trade skills a little bit faster. To my knowledge, they do stack with these. So carpentry, blacksmith, jewel crafting, leatherworking, pottery, and tailoring have a 5% increased chance with your Master Artisan. If you choose the same thing over here, like blacksmith, you're going to get an additional 5%, making that a 10% increase, faster increase. So it could be beneficial on those trade skills that are very difficult to do, so I would choose one of those. Other than that, you can choose pretty much any one of these, but again, as you level it up, once you get it at max level, it's not going to make any difference. One thing I will note though is that the enchanter one right here, if you're planning on doing jewel crafting, you do have to have an enchanter enchant the metal, or you need to use this trainee's tome of enchantment to enchant that. And if you're not an enchanter, you cannot get to this very easily to be able to get the tome to be able to enchant items. So if you're planning on being a trade skill person and you want to do all of the trade skills, specifically jewel crafting, I recommend maybe getting this one just so that you can get this tome in the beginning and you don't have to find an enchanter to then go and buy the tome somewhere else. And the final decision you have is your faith. To my knowledge, these don't do anything at all other than for roleplay purposes. There might be something in game later on down the road where you have a certain faith. You might be able to have higher faction with a certain group of people, but you should always be able to raise your faction with those groups in other means, usually speaking. So it's probably not going to be a big deal down the road, but having a certain faith might unlock certain dialogues or certain lore types of things. Anyway, hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, subscribe, follow, all that kind of stuff, and come over to the Twitch stream where we do talk about all sorts of games, a lot of MMOs, and we will be playing this game, like I said, on September 1st. So definitely come and say hello. Talk to you in the next one. Bye.